All right, welcome in, and this is the Cow Guy Close, and yes, I'm Scott Shellady, also known as the Cow Guy, and the World Bank is sounding the alarm about the global economy. Global growth is in a perilous state, they say. I want to follow this timeline with me, okay? Right? This timeline is going to be otherwise known as the obvious steps to self-destruction. That's what I'm calling it. First, it was the COVID lockdowns. Unlike it or not, the effects will be felt for years to come, maybe even decades. But look how hard it is even just getting workers to come back to the office. Then, because of the mandatory work stoppages, Western governments turned to their own cash and paid people basically to stay at home. Money they really didn't have, and they were racking up huge deficits in doing so. So upon the reopening, they continue to spend either out of guilt or misguided fiscal policies. But either way, this huge cash injection resulted in the obvious outcome: rampant inflation. Now, rampant inflation led to historically fast interest rate hikes, which in turn has thrown some sectors of the economy into a slowdown, sometimes a drastic slowdown. And at the same time, a vocal green contingency has been allowed to hijack common sense and curtail the lifeblood of these Western countries, energy. So combine that with overregulation for those who still believe that government is the answer, and there you have it, a shrinking global economy. That's the timeline. The U.S. is poised to grow at 0.7 or 0.7% this year, compared to last year's 2.6%. Now, if that's true, it'll be one of the worst growth rates in 5 decades, folks. So my next guest might have a thing or two to say about this, I think. Please welcome to the show Rebecca Walser from Walser Wealth Management. Thank you very much, Rebecca, for taking the time. I thought this would be a great one for you because I'm sure you've got something to say.
You know, Scott, this is exactly what I've been preparing the audience for since I've joined you for however long it's been. The mainstream is just not letting the news get through to people that we are in a global transition. This isn't just a global pullback. This isn't a global recession. This is a global transition as a direct result of how much stimulus was put through the world system in 2020, 2021. You cannot print the equivalent of over 20 trillion US dollars globally, inject that into the system to deal with a pandemic, and then think that there's no fallout. There is fallout, Scott. We cannot just create and invent wealth from, the air. So that is what we are going through. And what the World Bank is just alerting everyone to the fact is, there's all these prognosticators. Wall Street is its own business. You are one person I do not have to explain this to. It is its own engine. It creates its own narrative. It directs the Fed. Believe it or not, the Fed does not want to be the group that makes Wall Street crash. So, when we put all this pressure into a Fed pivot and a Fed pause, a Fed pivot, and the market starts to react that way because it's its own entity and its own situation, it creates its own narrative, Scott, and then lives inside of it. And so that's what we're dealing with. And the world is just not yet at the precipice point of understanding that the world is at a precipice.
And I mean, you're exactly right. They just don't get it. I mean, and one of the biggest things that really kind of shocked me, it shouldn't have shocked me, but I remember doing radio shows at the time, and nobody could go anywhere during the pandemic. We were all supposed to be locked down, which was draconian in its own sense. But I think that when these governments did not realize, and by shutting their own economies down and then throwing a lot of cash at the people, as a consequence of shutting down, that they weren't going to be getting any tax revenues because nobody's buying anything, right? So
right.
I'm not kidding you. There are principalities and municipalities that I talked to on the radio that were actually surprised that they weren't getting the tax receipts they used to get because they were shut down. But that's exactly what was going to happen, and they could not see that coming.
Well, I mean, this is the PhDs that are working for the Fed, right? Right. And you're just like, this is basic economics. This is basic fundamentals of supply and demand and a supply and demand curve. I mean, you put more money to obfuscate the fact that you've shut down artificially, which, by the way, I hope that the one thing that comes out of coronavirus shutdown is that we will never again, ever shut down the world under any circumstances, unless we absolutely know that you breathe this in and you're dead within 5 minutes. We can't be engineering, manipulation like that in a situation that's that fluid, that has to really have some time to figure it out. Because we put ourselves, the world put ourselves into this situation. We recapitalized investment banks in the fourth quarter of 2019. Then on top of that recapitalization, we have coronavirus in 2020. You've just got a Fed balance sheet of over $8.5 trillion. And that, Scott, what people don't talk about, what people don't think about is if we do have this sort of global reset, right? The Fed, of course, the global reset means we're sort of moving away from this existing system. So I can't talk about the new system as it will exist because the system is going to change. But the fact is that the Fed doesn't have the room on the balance sheet to save us again.
Exactly right.
They don't have the room.
And I've said it a different way. I got death threats when I was on another national station saying that we should never shut down before we shut down. That would be the dumbest thing we could possibly do is shut down. And then I actually fled Chicago to my place in Scottsdale because I was actually a little bit nervous about it. But number two is that I think now that these pandemics are 100 years apart because it takes us that long to get our money back. I mean, we can't have another shutdown, Rebecca, because we can't afford it. That's it. That's it. 20 seconds. 20 seconds to you. Wrap it up.
Listen, people need to understand that the media is not going to paint the real picture of what's really going on. You have to dig. You have to go to outside American sources to really find out what's going on and to prepare yourself. And all of those things that we've said, even though it might not happen as fast as we were expecting, people still should have some medals at home, some food and water at home, just because we know 7 days of the war games is when we get to chaos if we don't have people with food. So just be prepared. Things could get crazy in 2023.
Okay, love it. Awesome. Always a great point of view. Thank you very much for coming on, Rebecca Walser.